welcome to this video on mixing up the musical modes. If you're interested in the musical modes and how to use them in your own music, you're in the right place. My name's Rich. Let's dive straight in. So modes are a really interesting topic for us to know about as musicians. A really good book on this topic is this one, 20th-Century Harmony by Vincent Persichetti, which you can see on the screen here. Pretty much everything I'm going to cover in this video comes out of this book, so I definitely recommend this as further reading if you're interested in the modes and how to use them. So why compose with modes? Well, they're a great way to add colour to our compositions. They make a really effective alternative to major and minor keys. They expand our harmonic and melodic palette, and they're great for evoking certain moods and atmospheres. So as you probably already know, there are 7 basic modes, and the easiest way to play these is to use the white keys on a piano. That's the way they're often taught. So for example, C to C gives us Ionian, which is equivalent to a major scale. D to D gives us Dorian. E to E gives us Phrygian. F to F gives us Lydian. G to G, Mixolydian. A to A gives us Aeolian mode, or the natural minor scale. And then B to B gives us the Locrian mode, which is probably the least commonly used of the standard modes. So this is the way we normally learn them, by using the white keys on the piano. But the character of a mode isn't really defined by the start and end notes as such. The character or quality of the modes comes from the interval pattern of the notes within the mode. So what this means is, any note can be our home note or modal tonic. So Lydian mode, for example, doesn't have to start on F. As long as we keep the interval pattern of Lydian, we can start that mode on any note we like. We could have B flat Lydian if we like, or D Lydian. And the same goes for any other mode. So this gives us a lot of flexibility when composing with modes. Just like normal key signatures, we can use any mode, beginning on any key, and even modulate freely between them. So this makes them a really valuable resource for us as composers. And modes can be put on a scale from the brightest sounding to the darkest. So if we begin with the brightest standard mode, which would be Lydian, if we add 1 flat each time, that gives us a different mode and a progressively darker flavour. So moving from Lydian, we then get Ionian, to Mixolydian, to Dorian, to Aeolian, then to Phrygian, and finally the mode with the most flats and the darkest sound is Locrian. So a minute ago we mentioned that 2 modes are equivalent to normal major or minor keys, right? The Ionian mode is equivalent to a normal major scale, and the Aeolian mode is equivalent to the natural minor scale. Each other mode has what we call a characteristic scale step. So Persichetti, he calls this the flavor tone of the mode. Right, and we can enhance the modal flavor or the character of the mode we're using by using these characteristic tones quite often. If we use them a lot in our melodies, if we use them a lot in our harmonies, then we enhance the character, or we enhance the modal character of the music. So for example, let's take Lydian again, right? So our characteristic scale step here, the thing that makes it different from a major scale is the raised 4th step. Okay, so if we're using that note a lot in our melodies, if we're using a lot in our harmonies, then it will effectively sound more Lydian, yeah, because we're making it sound different from a standard major scale. And it's the same for every other mode. I won't tell you all of these, but they're appearing on the slide in front of you now. So if you want to get a screenshot or if you want to take some notes, they're all there on the slide in front of you. And each mode has a set of primary and secondary chords. So we said just a minute ago that it's important to use the characteristic tones or flavor tones to enhance the character of the mode. So with that in mind, the primary chords are the tonic chord, so chord 1 of our mode, plus any other chords that utilize the characteristic tones of that mode. Yeah? Secondary chords are those not involving these characteristic tones. So I'll just give you one example. Again with Lydian mode, our tonic chord is always going to be chord 1. And then the primary chords are the ones that use the raised 4th. right? So in Lydian mode, that's chord 2 and chord 7. Yeah, so these three chords in Lydian are our primary chords, chord 1, chord 2, and chord 7. Of course, we've got other chords within Lydian. We could use chord 2, chord 5, chord 6, but they're not really going to give us the same Lydian flavor as the three primary chords. And it's the same for the other modes, right? Now, I'm not going to read all of these out, but they are appearing on the slide. So again, if you want to make a note or take a screenshot, you can do. I'm also planning on uploading this slideshow to my website. So if you'd like to get these slides for free, head on over to richmillington.com and I'll put the slides on there as a free download. Let's talk about modal flavor a little bit more. So as we said, we preserve or enhance the modal flavor by making use of the tonic chord of the mode, plus the chords that involve the characteristic flavor tone. So for example, if we're writing in Phrygian mode, the more our melody and harmonies include the flavor tone, the flattened second step, the more Phrygian it will sound. Okay, so let's listen to an example which is here on the screen. I'll just play this for you first. So that example sounds okay, but you might have noticed that it doesn't include the flavor tone of the Phrygian mode. So this is E Phrygian we're in now, and the flat second would be the note F. But if you look at this example, there are no F notes. So what we have here is something that doesn't really sound Phrygian. It sounds kind of generically minor. But we want to enhance the Phrygian flavor, right? So let's switch this up and we'll introduce some flavor tones, which in this case would be F. So let me just show you this one. So this second version, it's clearly much more Phrygian in character. It has that darkened quality that we get from flattening the second scale degree. Let's talk a little bit about the tritone. So each standard mode has a chord containing a tritone, right? So we can see this here on the screen. Firstly, if we look at the F Lydian scale here, you can see each of the triads that make up F Lydian. And you'll notice that chord 4 is highlighted here. The notes of that chord are B, D, and F. And that's important because between the B and the F, we have kind of this special interval called a tritone. And because we're in F Lydian, and B is 4 notes up from F, the tritone chord in Lydian happens to be chord 4. So let's take a listen to those chords. And just for comparison, we can see a similar thing in E Phrygian just below. This time our home note is E, and we've also got the tritone chord there, B, D, and F. And because B is 5 notes up from E, that means that chord 5 is the tritone chord in Phrygian mode. All right, so let's have a listen to those. So why is this important? Why am I telling you all this? Well, it's because the chord containing a tritone needs to be handled kind of carefully. The tritone basically sounds like an incomplete dominant seventh chord. All right, and dominant sevenths are very characteristic of major and minor tonality, which is almost like a different musical language. So if we're writing a modal piece and we use something that sounds like a dominant seventh in the middle, it's like hearing someone suddenly switch languages. It's like hearing someone suddenly switching from English to, for example, Spanish. You'll be left wondering, why has this person suddenly started using Spanish? And are they going to start speaking English again? So it can be a little bit confusing for our listeners. Let me show you what I mean here. Have a listen to these 3 chords, which are in E Phrygian, and try to anticipate the next chord in your mind. What chord feels like it needs to come next? Now, if you're like most people, you might have imagined something like this second one that's here on the slide, which sounds like this. So in a sense, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, except now we don't really feel like we're in E Phrygian anymore. We feel like we've been pulled out of E Phrygian and into C major, so we've lost that Phrygian quality, and we're going to have to work quite hard to get that back if we've included this in our music. So this is why we need to be a little bit careful with the tritone. It sounds like we're pulling out of the mode and into a major key. So how do we deal with this? Well, Persichetti recommends a pretty simple way, which is just to avoid using the chords involving a tritone, and that will help us preserve our modal flavour. So here's a similar chord progression to the one we've just seen. It begins with chord 1 in E Phrygian, and then goes to chord 7, just like the last one. But this time, I'm avoiding using that 5 chord. I don't want to use it. Instead, I've used chord 1, then chord 2. So by avoiding that tritone chord, I haven't created a pull towards C major. We remain within the sound world of Phrygian. Yeah, and just because I like this progression, I think it sounds quite cool. We can hear the same thing arranged for strings. So we're definitely staying within the sound world of Phrygian here. We're not creating any kind of tendency or any kind of movement out of Phrygian mode and into a related major key. But then again, maybe there are times when we need to use that tricky tritone chord, right? We can't always avoid it. So if we do want to use it, then we can use a chromatically altered version, right? So for example, if our tritone chord is B, D, and F, like the ones we've just seen, we could lower the B to a B flat, or the F we could raise to an F sharp. Either of these would remove that tritone quality from that chord, which removes the pull into a major key. It will help us to stay within the sound world of the mode we're writing in. So in this example, we're going to stay in E Phrygian, and you'll see there are 3 bars here. So bar 1 is chord 1 in E Phrygian. Bar 2 is chord 5, which is normally the tritone chord, and then bar 3 is back to chord 1 again. So if we just take a look at bar 2, you'll notice that we've got the B, D, F chord, but this time I've flattened the B to B flat. Okay, so this has removed the tritone, right? So let's just have a listen to what that sounds like. So this is a pretty effective way of remaining within the Phrygian sound world, right, and not pulling ourselves out into a major key. So let's do a quick recap on what we've covered so far. So there are 7 basic modes, and each mode has its own character. Some modes have a lighter or brighter character, while others are darker. And each mode has a characteristic flavor tone, right, and we enhance the modal character by using the flavor tone often. Similarly, each mode has 3 primary chords, so we've got the tonic chord, plus any major or minor chords that use that flavor tone. There's also a tritone chord within each mode, and that tends to pull us out into a related major key, so we can avoid this by either avoiding the tritone chord altogether, or we can alter it chromatically. Okay, and that will help us to stay within the sound world of the mode we're writing in. Okay, and finally, in the next video, this is part 1 of 2, so in the next video we'll continue looking at modes, and we'll be looking at modal mixture, different ways of combining modes, and we'll also be looking at polymodality, so writing in 2 different modes at the same time. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please do like, subscribe, and share. And if you would like these slides, then head on over to my website, that's richmillington.com, where you'll be able to download these for absolutely free. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.